Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rowing Chat podcast. I'm Rebecca Caro, and I started this podcast in 2013 with a view to connecting real people in the sport with coaches and educationalists from whom we can all learn. And that, for me, has always been my personal journey of discovery. You see something and you think, oh, that's interesting, and I want to dive in further and learn a little bit more. And that brings me as a perfect introduction to my guest today, who is Liz Winter, who sent me a really interesting article, which we'll tell you a little bit about later, and a question: was this a suitable developmental model for masters rowing? But first, Liz, welcome to Rowing Chat.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Tell the listeners a little bit about you and your background in the sport.
Well, I started rowing in college as an undergraduate at Oxford and rowed for my college and then for the university. Moved to London, rowed for some clubs there and started coaching at that point. And this was way back in, the 1970s. So I've been involved in rowing since then. Came to the US about 30 years ago and have been involved in rowing in Pittsburgh for many years and proudly a member of Three Rivers Rowing for a long, long time. Coached Carnegie Mellon here in Pittsburgh and have been coaching masters rowers for a long time. My non-rowing world is started in law, and I went from law to social work, and at this point, I'm sort of putting all of those things together. So I think that's probably a good enough place to start.
So the article, where your interest in pulling all these things together, was about Norway, and it was an article in the Telegraph about the Norwegian Youth Sports Development program. So what was it about this article, Liz, that really caught your eye?
Well, it's a developmental model that follows the track of youth development in the sort of biological, psychological, and social sense. And how that plays out is that the emphasis is on participation in an age-appropriate way. And one of the things that they do is they scale competition and actually delay high-level, high-pressure competition until children and youth are older. So, at a certain age, you can row or you can compete in the equivalent of your city, county. And then at another age, you can start to, in the US, it might be at the state level. And then at another age, you can compete regionally. And then at another age, you can compete nationally. So, and the idea is to scale the pressure of competition according to appropriate youth development. In other words, what is a reasonable, healthy amount of pressure and stress for someone to develop safely enough in a biological sense, in a psychological sense, in a social sense. So that's. Oh, I'm sorry.
It sounds quite logical, as in, when you're 12, 13, 14, you haven't got a huge concentration span, and a half day going to a regatta, racing and coming back, i.e. somewhere that's not very far to travel, sounds like more than enough.
Right. And so, I mean, the idea is to keep the cost to the youth, the social emotional cost down and not over pressure people. Now, I think there's some concern in many places that if you delay high level competition, you delay high level performance. And interestingly, the Norwegian ski team walked away with an enormous medal haul in the Winter Olympics. And those athletes came through this system. Now, that doesn't mean you can take a system and transplant it everywhere else because it's in a social environment. It's in a certain culture. But, maybe there are things to learn from this. The other piece of it is that sports are very family oriented, so that whole families engage in sports. Sports clubs encourage family engagement. And that's a little different, perhaps, from many of the models. In rowing, there's a youth program, and then there's a master's program, and maybe there's an open program. But people don't, you don't get in boats together as a day-to-day kind of thing, particularly when people are younger. So
that's interesting, because I mean, there is the odd kind of parent and child race, but I can equally understand that I would have loathed rowing with my mother. Not that she was a rower, but I could see that the two of us would have just been friction central.
Right.
Someone else's mom might be different.
Well, if you joined a club as a family, that doesn't mean you necessarily, I assume, would sit in a boat together, and that would be an important coaching decision.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. It would.
I had so the youth sports development runs up presumably to around age 18, after which I guess people then make what we now consider to be the current choices, which is, are you going into elite high performance sport? Are you going into club sport? Are you going into just social sport? I mean, I say just, but I think that's also important. And how might a model like this, which you've given us really clear guidance that it's built on biology, so socializing people, and is emotion the third thing?
Well, it's if I think of it as what's often called the biopsychosocial model. So it's the psychological includes the emotional, and and the way we manage competition in a cognitive and emotional kind of way. So it would cover emotional and cognitive, our thinking structures as well as our feeling.
When I coach 10 to 14-year-olds in rowing, one of the things that I particularly enjoyed about the group that I had was that sometimes I would just say to them, what would you like to do today? And I would let them set the framework for the outing. And as a coach, I spent a lot of time making sure that their concentration span matched the activity that I chose. But broadly speaking, we would get in the boats, we'd meet on the other side of the river, we'd go upstream, we'd stop, they would splash around for a bit and chill and rest, and then we'd all come back together. That was the rough framework. What surprised me when I asked them an open question was the vast majority of them said, can we race? It was nearly always their answer. So how does that kind of attitude at, as I said, that sort of age range fit into the Norwegian model? Is it appropriate that kids want to race, or are we discouraging competition?
My understanding of this is that we're not discouraging competition. And if there's, a desire to do that, great, go do that. I think the concern is that there are some guardrails about how intensely we ask and maybe push youth to compete at higher and higher and higher levels. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so I see that more as guard. It's not like don't race. It's race all you want. Race these people down the river. Race locally. Get your terrible metaphor, but get your feet wet doing that before you go off to something in the next state. So, we would think of that as friendlies or scrimmages, but it's putting those guardrails in so that you're not shoving your youth forward. Like, you're good, you've got to do more, you've got to compete higher, we've got to go to nationals, we've got to do the guardrails are there that say, yeah, they'll get there. Some of them will get there, some of them won't. And the other piece of it for me is how many people, and I know we're going to get to masters and it's the same question, how many people do we lose? And we know because maybe we're emphasizing a particular area of rowing so intensely that there are people who might not feel they belong. And that's a concern, because we know that when people leave high school, the US rowing membership plummets. And how do we, and that's just in the US, and that may be in other places too, but how do we hold people in the world of rowing? Because we know it's a lifelong sport, rather than we lose them, and then what do we have to do to get them back? And why are we losing them? So I think there may be some answers in this kind of thinking.
So you hinted that you think this could apply to masters rowing, and you're an experienced masters coach, and I'm guessing you were or are a masters competitor.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through how you think a developmental model could be framed for masters rowing, because am I right, there isn't one right now?
I would hesitate to say there isn't one. I'm not sure that that's predominantly how we think, so I'll be a little cautious about that. But I think that we've got the range. I mean, part of what we sometimes think of as a problem in masters rowing, and I'd rather frame it as an opportunity, is that we have an incredible range of ages, we have an incredible range of abilities, and we have an incredible range of motivation. And so, so the developmental piece doesn't go by age, it goes by all of those other factors. So, what, the kind of racing I wanted to do when I was, 25 is maybe not the same kind of racing I now want to do in my 60s, right? But I still want to race. So, those things shift over the life course to some degree. They shift with physical ability. They shift with people's responsibilities in other parts of their lives. Are they raising children? Are they caretaking old parents? How and where does someone fit in terms of, there are plenty of people that want to row better, but they don't necessarily want to compete. And do we have the same level of respect? So I'm going to start throwing this respect, the R word around. Do we respect that goal in the same way that we respect the goal of someone who wants to go to nationals and medal, right? Or top 10 at the trials?
Yeah. So goal choices and articulating them and understanding them, and then setting up our programs, our clubs, our training groups around those goal choices. Am I right that that is what you see as the big challenge?
Right. And I think I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think one of the things that certainly I've seen over the years is that, there are the people who want to go really fast, and then, oh wait, there are the rest over here, and never mind. That in some way there's some sort of sense of, it being less than, rather
That's
than
true.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Because, and I see it in really subtle things like the description of people who don't race as recreational, whereas I would prefer to call them fitness rowers.
I think, our language
You're
is
not a
tricky.
recreational gym, aerobics person. You go to the gym for, health and fitness reasons. And I know aerobics has competitions, but most people who are doing that particular sport aren't generally on a competition. The competition isn't a big choice for that. And nobody thinks it has that sort of light, sort of patronizing tone. And so I'm trying to say there are fitness rowers, and then there are people who choose to race sometimes, some more than others. Does that work?
I think it takes us more than a couple of steps in the right direction, because it starts moving the language from a value laden, these are our competition racers or our competitive rowers, and oh dear, you're not one of those, right? Which as you say, it's subtle. It's it's using words like, well, they only row twice a week.
Yep.
As opposed to, well, right. They row twice a week for whatever reason. And the reason should not be assumed to be because you couldn't make it in this other team. But you have to accept that all of these things, in order to make this work, it's that R word again. We have to respect that this person is in this place at this time, and the reasons they're in this place at this time are not, we don't get to judge those. They are what they are. And if we accept them and start shifting our language to, instead of making assumptions like, well, if you get better here, you can always try out. The assumption being that people want to do a particular thing. And it really is pervasive, and people persist sometimes in spite of it because they love the sport. But the environment could perhaps be more welcoming. We could level that playing field with the understanding that some people perform in this way and some people perform in that way, and celebrate both.
Yeah, and celebrate both. Isn't that the essential inclusivity aspect?
Right. It's as opposed to tolerate each other.
Now, our sponsor for this week is Rowing Tales 2022. This is a book that I have curated and edited. It is an anthology of stories about rowing, as the title implies. And I have been producing this for the last 6 years. This is the 6th edition. It published literally last week. This is one of the very first copies that I have in my hand. I'm stroking it for those of you who are going to be listening to this at some point in the future. And one of the things that I enjoy particularly about pulling a book like this together is the fact that people tell me the most delightful stories. Here's one of them. Charles Wemyss talked about the rowing mantra. He said, at Berwick, which is a high school, we had a little mantra that we used most days after practice. What do? We row. Why do we row? For body, soul, and spirit. How do we row? With technical excellence and strength. Who are we? We are Berwick crew. And he ends by saying, it all is really that simple. And that is the final tale in this year's book. You can get it and all of the others on Kindle and in print edition on all of the Amazon stores. And I very much hope, since these shipped really quickly from the US to where I live in New Zealand, that there is plenty of time for you to get them for Christmas presents this year. Now we have a live listener, and there is a interesting observation here. Recreational fitness is perhaps 2 categories. Interesting suggestion. We have people at our club who row for exercise and some who row socially. We have a group that does nature rows to go and look at the birds and animals. Well, isn't that a thing? And a suggestion that perhaps another title other than recreational might help. What do you think of that, Liz?
I think that any group gets to decide how they want, or any club gets to decide what their populations are, if you like, what their groups are, and how they should title themselves. I don't know that I would necessarily want to make that decision. I think this is somewhere where we can develop this language, and in the US we don't have a tradition of row touring, but Europe has an incredibly strong tradition of that, and is that I wouldn't throw out recreational. I would perhaps reclaim it, and think about it differently. I think we're in an evolution here, and I hope we do seize the opportunity to frame however somebody participates in rowing as in a way that is positive and respectful.
There was a group at a club that I used to belong to who were mums mostly, and they rowed about sort of 10 o'clock in the morning after they'd taken their kids to school. And the club laughingly once referred to them as the ladies who lunch. And the ladies came back quick as a flash and said, absolutely not. We are the high maintenance group.
Right. We had a group of masters women in Pittsburgh who were the 8 great tomatoes.
Oh,
I'm not sure what. I'm not sure where that came from even, but I remember them well and had the privilege of coaching them at one point many years ago.
Well, let's revive the 8 Great Tomato group. Now, as a coach, it's obviously a leadership position in context. How do you approach a group that has diverse goals?
Ooh, well, I mean, it depends how big a group and and how you have to how how much coaching coverage do you have and how do you keep people safe? Because that's always the first thing. We're on pretty cold water here in Pittsburgh most of the year. So we often, our masters teams often, and several of them often mix crews with people who might move a boat faster and people who might move a boat less fast. Uh, and so that we can keep boats together and keep them safe.
So crews of similar speed.
Crews of similar speed. So safety is going to be the first thing there. And we're in a club where we can shift, where we have, I don't know, maybe half a dozen different masters teams that row at different times and have different goals. So if you can split people out, that's fine. But if you cannot, then giving people opportunities to do what is for them their sweet spot, with the understanding that they may not get that every single time they're out, and that everyone is moving along the technical and fitness developmental path in the way that makes sense for them. And that might be some additional workouts for people who are looking to build an aerobic base more, or people who are looking to build speed more. But for the most part, I think you can really do a lot of good technical work across categories, because there are people who go really fast and still need to figure out what to do with that outside rest, right? Those those things that get ingrained. And so there are things you can do, and if you have the opportunity to do things on the ergs for technical work and speed work, to do things on the water, and if you have the sort of the holy grail of the tanks in where we are, because we're off the water mostly at this point, then you can do a lot with that. So I think some of it's about being creative, and you and I had spoken about this at another time, about this is the challenge for the coach, is to meet people where they are and give them what they need, rather than saying, we're going to this point and you got to make it. And I know one way to coach that.
How often do you check in with individual athletes then about what they're working on or want to do?
Personally, most of the work I've done recently has been with individuals and small groups. So it's been a while since I've had a whole team. But I think you check in to some degree every practice. You come off the water and there's, you check in to see where people are, and it's a touch point. It's a touch point to see if everyone's okay. It's a touch point to see if people felt they got what they wanted from the session. And then it's being willing, at the team level, to be questioned, I think. And to set up a culture. My hope is that we've moved beyond, or that we will move beyond, the coach is unquestionable. That's the divine right of coaches. I'm hoping we've gone beyond that, and that people expect to be able to articulate what they're doing and why, including selection, which is tricky, but it's important.
It is. Tell me then, from a club management board committee point of view. You mentioned your actual club has 6 or 8 separate masters training groups. If I'm a newcomer, how do I get allocated to a group? And what is the diversity of those groups? Is one of them just like, I have to train at 6 a.m. because I have a full-time job? Or how do you work that out?
Oh, what a fabulous question, and what a moving target that has been. I mean, boy, I wish I had a neatly packaged answer that everybody would be happy with for that. This is something we struggle with, and sometimes that's been better than others, but certainly, for some teams, it's early morning. That's it. Them's your options, right? And so for people who may want to be in that team who cannot do early mornings, that's tough because it's a non-starter for them. And so, if that's the group they want to be in many ways, they may be able to be in it, except for the fact that their schedule maybe requires them to be in an OR at 6 o'clock. So no, you're not on the water. So it depends. But for the most part, it's sort of a negotiation. People talk to coaches. They are often invited to show up, and they sort of find, for the most part, except perhaps and sometimes even in our more competitive teams, it's does this feel like a fit to you? Does it feel like a fit to the coach?
Yeah.
We don't have, the commitment in our club has always been that this is a community-based club that produces people who go fast and people who want to do a whole bunch of other things. And so, back in the very, very early days, there was a lot of tension about, why don't we just have an elite club?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? And people who came with the value that we wanted to do something more inclusive. And so that was a back and forth. And you can see, different high school programs that approach that differently in the boathouse. You could see different college programs that approach that differently. Some were varsity, some were club, some were particular kind of club. I mean, a lot of different ways of doing that. But you'd ask, how do people find their home? And it's sometimes who you know and who you're comfortable with. It's often the coach.
So interpreting it from what you've said, it has to start with strategy. You have to have, as a club, a statement, and yours was, we are a community-based club who have some people who race fast. And I think that is really important, because that is the litmus test against which you can judge anything. So if there are group forms that says we are only a racing group, you can then say yes, or yes, but. And for example, one of the situations where we, in my Faster Masters business, frequently have dialogue with individuals is, I've been racing for X years, where X is usually at least 3 or 4, and I'm racing now. What do I have to do to get into the elite racing group? And of course, elite racing groups have a mindset of competition, which says, I want to be the weakest person in the group. I want to row with people who are stronger and better and fitter than myself. And therefore, letting a newbie in who is not as fast as the rest of us challenges the integrity and the goal of race winning. And that then has to then be reflected back against the strategy. We are a community-based club. And it is then a negotiation, as you correctly say, but clear boundaries. And I've talked about this many times, so it's no secret, but in my community-based club, which is similar to yours, we have a mandate that on a Saturday morning, when the club meets to row, we deliberately mix abilities. And this is the opportunity for people to row with people who are better, faster, more experienced, different than themselves, often mixed sex as well as mixed ability and mixed goals. And this is how we bring on our less experienced people. And you are not allowed to request a crew for that, a lineup for that session. It is only once a week. And pretty much everyone falls in with that, because that is the social outing afterwards. We go for breakfast together and talk. And if you absent yourself always from that session, it's pretty much noticed. You know, if you're rowing Monday through to Friday and Sunday, and some reason you're not there on Saturday on a regular basis, it's not so much that questions get asked, but an eyebrow gets raised. And you know, your contribution to that session is an important part of your membership of the club. All the rest of the week, you can request, you can, you know, make your own lineups and, you know, request whatever you want. Like, I only want to do sweep, or I'm only interested in my single, or please, can we always do an 8 on a Friday morning, or whatever it is. And it's been very interesting, because that was already in the club long before I joined. And I actually think it's one of the most useful things I have ever seen. And I advocate for it like this, because I think more clubs could try it, particularly masters with, as you politely said, diverse abilities, diverse ages, and diverse goals. And it creates an environment where once a week, everyone can do the same thing, even if that thing is side by side rowing across 1,000-meter piece, and you're not allowed to get more than half a length in front or behind the other crew. Yeah. How are you going to manage that when you know your lineup of mixed ability people, and then I know my lineup of mixed ability people, and we've all got to work together to problem solve? How do you not get in front and not fall behind?
Right. Right. I love this idea. I think you know, we do something similar a couple of times a year, where, you know, people show up, and but it's not an expectation. It's a, you know, come if you want to do this. But I think you know, what I'm hearing is that this is a lovely way to be a little less siloed. And
I think that's a really good phrase. Siloing is one of the things that frustrates more competitively minded rowers. Then I think it frustrates them more than anything else, is because I don't mind being siloed, but is there a pathway for progress? And if I can't see a pathway, then I get frustrated.
Right. And I think I mean, if it's a value that you meet the rest of your community on the water on a Saturday morning, then, you know, then people get to know each other, and the lines between the teams are perhaps a little less distinct. And that's, I would think that's more of a, you know, that is a community minded way to go. But, you know, as we're talking, you know, part of me is thinking, boy, I'm describing what I think happens in Pittsburgh. I wonder if some of my other club members would say, what is she talking about? What's that? So, you know, you always describe things from your own perspective. So I have to say that. So I hope I'm doing Three Rivers, you know, justice in my description.
If someone's listening to us talking today, and they're a coach or a club administrator or an interested party who wants their club to progress and advance and perhaps be more inclusive, what are the signs that you're not getting it right? Because I think spotting those then gives people an opportunity to start a conversation.
Right. I think if you find yourself, I mean, so some of the things we talked about earlier are around language. So if you find yourself or hear yourself or your colleagues, particularly your coaching colleagues, talking about only and just, and a story that comes to mind is, you know, we get a lot of, as many people do, a lot of people who are coaching in the summer are rowing college in the fall and the spring.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Right. So they will come into summer programs, which may well be learn to row programs, or short duration programs, which let's say learn to row, and are coming in with some assumption that what they do in their college programming is the only right thing. So that's and so they may then look at, and so we've probably all heard stories about them looking at someone who's signed up for a 6-week learn to row package, saying, well, I did drills with them and they just can't do them. Right. So then the question is, are we matching or developing our coaching skills to meet the needs of the people we're coaching? Because if it doesn't work, it's not the athlete's problem, it's our problem, right? So if you're doing a drill and you can't get what you want out of it, it's not the right drill. If you can't see what you want to see, then if I'm doing something and it's not doing what I want, I have to change what I'm doing. And it doesn't mean less than, it means different. And it's actually harder as a coach to be more creative and say, all right, this thing is just not working. They can't get the blades off, or no one can feather, or what, everyone's miserable. Good sign that we're not getting it right. People are generally unhappy. That's a really good indicator that we've not made it, we've not made the increments, the learning increments, what they need to be. If we find ourselves using words like, I want you to try this, that the T word is in my perhaps not so humble opinion, is one that I would love to excise from the language. Do or do not, there is no try. It's like, let's do this. It will do something useful. Let's see what that is. Not, I want you to try this thing, which implies that I'm not really confident that you can do it, frankly. Yeah. And in which case, why am I giving it to you? Why am I asking you to do that? And the other thing is, I'm giving you an out of, well, I tried.
Yeah.
And I frankly don't want to give you either one. I would like you to do something, get whatever benefit from it we can get from that, and then let's see where that gets us, and let's reassess, and we'll build on that again. So if I'm finding myself wanting to say to people, well, let's try this, that's a me problem. It's a coaching problem.
That's really interesting. And coach professional development is often self-directed because, of course, there are coaching qualifications, and that's very appropriate. But you are on your own most of the time, and the only people observing you are your athletes. And yes, of course, it is lovely to have athletes who think you're wonderful, but equally, you probably aren't a great judge of what you need for your own development. So have you thought through the challenge of community sports coaches and how to develop skills?
I don't know that I've thought it through to a fabulous conclusion, but it's something I chew on regularly. So professional development, yes, you have to go look for it. And I think we're going to learn something from any other coach we spend time with, and not always what it is they think they're teaching. Right. So, for better or worse, we'll sit with someone and say, that's interesting. I love that. I love the way you talk to your athletes. And there's this other thing. And I don't want to do that. So I think there's, find people you respect, and time constraints and time and distance, permitting, try and spend time with them and see what you can take in by osmosis. I mean, so that's the sort of the informal coaching development. Formal coaching, professional development in wherever you're located in your country that's never going to be wasted. Get what you can where you can. And if I think about, I started coaching in 1978, long ago and far away, and you just you sort of sat and watched people do stuff, and then you kind of made it up as you went along as best you could. And so there's always this thing of, what do I want to use from this, and what about this do I not want? Not just in terms of technique, but in terms of style, in terms of kindness, respect. There's always a place for kindness, right? If nothing else, be kind. What's it to you? Be kind. I sometimes think that inadvertently, because we may be invested in a particular outcome, then we convey that to the athlete when they don't meet our expectation, which is, a form of shaming. And that's, no, it's about, what do I need to do differently? Sorry.
Yeah, it comes back to those goal choices that you were so clear about at the beginning. So just to summarize, the idea now is that we should be possibly looking at a developmental model that is oriented towards development, i.e. progress or along a pathway, giving equal respect to life needs, people's performance choices, and their bodily needs and functions, so that there is a route that people can see how they're going, enjoy the process, and commit to it. But also, if I'm guessing here, they can step up, step down, step in, step out as their life adapts, adjusts, changes. Is that your goal for Masters Rowing?
Yes, and I'm going to push back at the language again just a little bit, and step up and step down. It's like, well, step in here, step in there. Because I'm not, we know some people go faster than others, and some people, it just isn't their goal. So, is it being out there more intensely with the goal of racing faster?
Frequency, maybe. So, row more frequently and less frequently.
There you go. And, if you want to get better technically, you don't necessarily want to go faster. That's not everyone's goal. Their goal is, their goal may be, I want the best health span and quality of life I can get for as long as I can get it. And step into that.
What a brilliant phrase to end on. Liz, it's been delightful having you with us. Three Rivers Rowing Association are extremely fortunate to be working with you. And I'm really glad that we started this conversation. So to any of our listeners as part of Rowing Chat, if you would like to learn more, Liz, please tell people where listeners can connect with you.
Probably the best way to reach me is my email address, and that's lizwinterpgh at fabulous Gmail. Not fabulous, but gmail.com. So
excellent.
lizwinterpgh, and it would be a pleasure. So thank you so much.
And to all of our listeners, if you've enjoyed the Rowing Chat episode you're listening to now, please share it, tell your friends. And if you like to get a weekly email that tells you of new episodes, just go to the website www.rowing.chat. And till next time, bye-bye.